Hey there, I'm Sharon Welch, and welcome to A Brave Journey, the podcast to help you throw out those legacy belief and identity stories that you've been lugging around on autopilot for decades, so you can jump back in the driver's seat of your aliveness again. When you change your mind, you change your life. Are you ready? Let's get into it. It'll be fun. I am curious about your thoughts on curiosity. You've often heard me describe myself as a curious citizen of the world. And the term curiosity can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. In fact, many people consider curiosity to be a negative. Think of some of the old sayings that we've heard: curiosity killed the cat, ignorance is bliss, don't ask questions that you don't want to know the answers to, mind your own business, what you don't know can't hurt you. I think the overarching theme there is, if you don't know, you can remain safe. If you don't know, you can stay comfortable in your current belief and identity system. And I think at its core, the idea of not being the tall poppy, not standing out, not creating waves, is something that a lot of us, at one time or another, either all the time or in certain situations, have used as a survival mechanism. So I understand that. But curiosity is really the only way that we can grow as people. We have to take in new information, both to pressure test our own sense of identity, beliefs, our knowledge about the world, as well as new information is available to be willing to reevaluate, be willing to refresh how we see things in the world. This has been on my mind because recently I came across a TEDx talk out of Bellevue, Washington by a woman named Julie Pham, PhD and consultant in the Seattle area. And she does a talk on curiosity as a practice. And I've watched this TED talk several times. I will leave a link for it in the show notes. Highly recommend that you take a listen. It's really, really great. She discusses how, a lot of us define curiosity as the desire to learn. She also adds on that one aspect of curiosity is making the effort to learn. And she argues that the expectations about what we, quote, should be learning is what gets in the way of what we could be learning. And I think the takeaway from that concept is it's similar to what we've talked about before when it comes to belief and identity systems and these facades that we can wear to sort of survive life, to stay acceptable, to be included, is that there's this list of shoulds that exist out there, that if we do these things that we, quote, should do, that's how we remain safe. That's how we remain included. That's how we remain right. And what those shoulds do, according to Julie Pham, and I think we can apply this across many aspects of our lives, these shoulds get in the way of the possibility of the coulds. If you think about this world that we live in, there are an infinite number of things that we could be curious about, that we could be learning about. And whether we have such a long list of should be learning or that cause us to feel like we don't have the bandwidth for it, or perhaps we feel overwhelmed at the concept of an infinite number of things that we could be learning, we often do stick to those list of shoulds, and we don't allow our curiosity to go beyond those bounds, particularly when you put that together with all of these phrases that seem to suggest that when you're curious, you put yourself in an unsafe place where you're either going to be set up for failure, or you're going to be proven wrong, or you're going to be embarrassed, or you're going to find out something uncomfortable. All of these dynamics are at play when it comes to things like curiosity and being open and vulnerable in the world. So Julie goes on to explain how, there's the what we expect of people, of a situation, of our lives, of our career, and then there's the what we get. And in between those two things, there is this gap. And it is this gap that prevents us from learning or getting curious. We get stuck. Think about any time where you had a vision for how something was going to play out. Maybe it was a family vacation. Maybe it was a trajectory on your, the career promotion ladder. Maybe it was a birthday party that you planned. Maybe it was a new workout regimen that you planned. And you had this vision for how it was going to turn out. And then you went through the situation, you went through the process, you went through the activity, and what actually happened was completely different. Now, when we're stuck in that gap between those two things, a lot of times that's what brings up feelings of anxiety or anger or, beating ourselves up. All of these things that we tend to do when things don't go the way that we've planned it. I certainly know from personal experience, as I've often admitted to, I am a recovering toxic planner. I am one of those people who I like to know what's coming up. I like to have all the details nailed down. I have a plan, usually with 1,000 steps that all must occur so that I can remain in control of the universe, so that everybody is safe and I am safe. And when those plans would go awry, it would not be unusual for me to have a tantrum or spin out or have an emotional reaction to that. And that is an indicator that I'm stuck in that gap where I cannot learn and I cannot be curious. So that is your red flag when you have those sort of situations with the mismatch between what you planned and what you got. Another example of where it became really important for me to use curiosity as a practice, as opposed to allowing myself to get caught up in the spin and emotion of what felt like a rejection or a disrespect or a slight. I have traveled many places and I've learned a lot of things. I've discovered a lot of things. And I've documented a lot of that through social media and I've shared it with my friends and my family. So a couple years back, I have some friends who were planning a trip of a lifetime, a dream trip to Italy to spend a couple weeks to celebrate their anniversary. And one of their stops was a place that I had spent a month in and had found all kinds of really cool hikes and out of the way alleyways with amazing restaurants and shops. And I was so excited for being able to share that information with them. I was just really anticipating them reaching out and wanting to learn everything I learned. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and not a single question from them as they planned their trip. And then they headed off on their trip. They flew to Italy and they posted things that they discovered along the way. They got to the place where I had been for a month and had made all of my amazing discoveries, and not a single direct message, not a single text or WhatsApp or phone call to ask any advice from me. And I was so hurt. And I was frustrated and maybe a little angry. And I thought, well, oh my gosh, I have all this information. I mean, that just seems really kind of, rude and petty that they wouldn't, reach out and want this information from me. Right? Have we all been there? And then once I got done feeling my feelings, because as we've said, all feelings are okay and we just feel them. What I came back to was one of the things that really excited me about traveling, and still does, is the satisfaction and accomplishment and adventure and challenge of finding my own way, of figuring out things myself and of discovering new things that nobody else had told me about that I was able to find on my own. So why was it I felt I was entitled to them to have the behavior of asking me for all of my advice to follow my advice, when the very thing that made a trip like that exciting for me was exactly what they did, which was go have their own experience, make their own discoveries, and create the memories that were unique to the trip that they had. But it was really easy for me when I was stuck in that gap between what I expected and what I got, where I was frozen in that fear or that discomfort or that anxiety or that anger and disappointment of not being asked for my expertise. I was unable to be curious about the experience that they were having, which had nothing to do with me. And I think that's something that we do so many times in our lives is we take everything so personally, as if everything has us at the center of it, as if everything that's happening is because of or for us. And when the fact is there are millions of people who share this planet with us that all are having an experience similar to us and think that same way. And it was just so helpful. And it was such a great reminder for me as I came out the other side of those irrational emotions and realized my friends were having the time of their lives because they really are a lot like me, which meant they were going to find their own way and have the very best time by making their own discoveries. And while I'm sure they celebrated what I did on my trip, they wanted that experience to be their own. And had I not been able to come across that gap between my expectations and what actually happened, I might never have had the opportunity to appreciate that nuance. And so to truly get curious and to truly break that pattern, you have to find a way to cross that gap. And there's a couple different ways that you can look at that. To overcome our unmet expectations, we have to be open to at least a couple of things. One, we have to recognize that what's over there when we're making these plans, when we're deciding what our expectations are for a particular situation, our view of what's over there is really quite narrow. It's quite limited. So, as Julie describes, we have to understand that, number one. But two, the act of being curious suggests we have to move closer so that we can see more clearly what is over there. So a really good example would be if you are traveling to a foreign land and the people act differently and they exist differently. They speak differently, they eat differently, they commute differently, they work differently, they celebrate differently, all of these things. If you remain in your bubble of what you are familiar with, it is unlikely that the outcome of interacting in that culture or with those people will be what you expect because you are observing them from afar and you don't have a good enough vantage point to truly be able to gauge what an outcome might be. So to be curious suggests that you need to move closer. So to move closer, you will have to come outside of the safety of the bubble of what you know. And if not immerse yourself, certainly dip a toe into that unfamiliar, uncomfortable environment so that you have a broader view of what the potential outcome could be. So that's one mindset thing, that in any situation, understanding that you can't make a very accurate assessment of an outcome if you're looking at it from off yonder through binoculars or squinting your eyes. You have to move closer. The other thing, which perhaps is even more uncomfortable for some people, is the idea that you may need to learn from someone that you disagree with. This feels triggering or scary because, again, as we've talked about numerous times, our egos want us to be right, and we spend our whole lives, whether we know it or not, finding the evidence that tells us, that proves to us that we are right. We all do it. So this is not us judging ourselves. It's just recognizing that this is what happens. What this also does is it shuts us down from being open to new information and from learning. And so sometimes the mere thought that there is something that we could learn from someone that we disagree with feels so threatening that it shuts us down even further. But it's really all in about how you think about it. There is nothing to say that by listening to or learning from someone that you completely disagree with, that you're going to have to abandon your beliefs and your convictions, or that you're going to have to change your mind. There's absolutely no rule that says that. You might, as we continue to evolve over time, the information that we take in absolutely should cause us in some areas of our lives and in some of our belief systems to change our mind. That is the sign of an evolving, growing human. And there are some things that you will believe your whole life and never change your mind on, and that's okay too. So there should be nothing threatening about listening to and learning from someone who disagrees with you. What is their story? How did they come about this belief? What has been their experience living in this belief? Not from a place of you need to convert them or they need to convert you, but just gathering information to understand how different people live in the world. Even things that you think are an absolute, like, here's a simple example. 2 plus 2 equals 4. I have lived my whole life knowing that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and evermore shall it be. And that's true. And also, you can meet someone who lived their whole life knowing that 1 plus 3 equals 4, always has, always will, and that is the way that it will be. Both can be true. Both are true. That's very simple math, but you can apply that to almost anything in the world. As humans, we all want similar outcomes. We all want to achieve in our jobs, maybe. We want to have happy families. We want to be really good at a hobby. We want to be healthy. And if those are the equals 4 in that equation, how we get there, honestly, has a million different combinations of algebra, math, trigonometry. I don't know what you want to call it. There are a million different ways to get that outcome. But because we have lived in one version of that, we lull ourselves into thinking that it's the only way. I remember traveling at the end of the world. If you remember, 12/21, 2012 was going to be the end of the world. It's the end of the Mayan calendar. And I took a trip, my family and some dear friends of mine, our two families went to Mexico, to the center of Mayan culture, to experience the end of the world. And our plan on 12/21/12 was to go to Chichen Itza. And we did take a tour bus, and we had this great tour guide, and he was giving us some information about the cultural things as we were, heading out to this big event for the end of the world. And the journey out to Chichen Itza, you go through some of these little villages. And you look at these villages, and on the surface, if you come from a privileged white world, North America, many places in Europe, these villages look like the worst of the worst as far as, poverty ridden, sad, dirty, terrible places that you just made you feel sad. And many people on the bus were having that reaction. I also, this is many years ago, I also was like, oh, wow, to live in such abject poverty. What a terrible thing. And this tour guide was so fantastic. He so eloquently just weaved into the conversation a little snippet or little view into the attitude and lifestyle of these people that we were seeing. And what he pointed out was for us to look a little more closely and recognize that these were very tightly knit communities. These were joyful, content people who had pride in where they lived and what they did. and how they were in relationship and in families. They lived in multi-generational sort of living compounds. You would see children playing, making up games with what they had on the street. These were people who had the same desires at a core level that we do, to belong, to love, to be useful. And when you took another look out there, you saw that these people were getting to that equation answer just like we were, but using different math. That was a pivotal moment for me to really understand why it is so important to approach other people, other cultures, other mindsets with empathy and openness and vulnerability. Not because you are swaying in the wind and need to have your opinion changed, but because it allows you to, one, grant yourself more grace and understand that even you trying to solve your own life equations, even some of the ways that you're doing it yourself, that you've been trained and conditioned to believe are correct but don't feel comfortable anymore, when you see that other people do it other ways, it's a way to give yourself permission to find a way that works for you. So that makes it feel less risky. And then on the other side of that, by being aware that you're doing what works for you to get to those ends, so are the people who are different from you. And to have that empathy is, I think, the beginning of how we create less conflict and less misunderstanding in the world. And I think it's also what allows us as curious citizens of the world to move around our towns, to move around our societies and cultures and into other cultures around the world. And instead of trying to change it or criticize it, to first approach it with empathy and curiosity and appreciate it for what it is. So these are all of the things that curiosity can do for you. And of course, now that we've figured out how to save the world and solve all its ills through curiosity and cultural awareness, I think the big takeaway about curiosity as a practice is to make it personal. I think one of the ways as we are on this journey to reclaiming our authentic identities is we must be curious. We must be curious about why we've held so tightly on to the beliefs and identity stories that we do hold on to. We must be curious about why certain things trigger us or make us feel unsafe. And we must be curious about why we react the way we react when the universe does what the universe does. I think when we start from a place of curiosity rather than condemnation, I think that's a Ted Lasso quote, be curious and not critical, something like that. I don't remember the exact quote. I'm sure I botched it, but go watch Ted Lasso. I'm sure you'll hear it. If we can afford ourselves that kindness of curiosity, that's going to give us a deeper insight into how we tick. It really is, and I'll put the link again in the show notes, when we can start writing out what are these belief systems that we have? Why do we have them? How has that served us? How has that not? Is that still true for us? What is more true? When we go through that exercise in the limiting beliefs journaling exercise that I have, that's us practicing curiosity. And if we can just continue to ask questions with an ability to have an open-ended answer, it allows us to be in conversation with ourselves. It allows our spirit, our soul, to be in conversation with our ego, even though our ego really rarely wants anyone to get a word in edgewise. Through curiosity and through open-ended questions and through empathy and kindness for ourselves, we can really start to map out and understand why we believe what we believe. And for the things that we can't quite pin on why that is we hold that belief, maybe that's the place to start, to see if there's something that is more true for us, that we can recurate that particular belief to be something that is closer to who we know we are authentically. So curiosity is such a powerful tool. And being willing to go through life asking questions, even at the risk of setting ourselves up for failure, even at the risk of sounding dumb, I'm using air quotes, even at the risk of getting an answer that we had hoped not to get, that's how we move closer. That's how we move closer to have a better view of what is across that gap between what we expect and what we get. And that's where everything starts, right? It starts inside us. So at the micro level, that's what curiosity is doing. And then when that expands out into the macro level and how we show up in the world, the part that we play, we've now practiced that curiosity and that empathy and given ourselves that grace inside, so that when we are out in the world and we are interacting with others who are all unique and different from us, we can come from that place of curiosity and questioning, which again closes that gap between what we expect and what we get. And we've inched closer to these things that are different from us to have a better perspective, a wider view. And because we can see more, we can feel more confident, and we can feel braver, and we can feel more safe to ask those questions, to seek first to understand before deciding that something needs to be changed or before needing to pass a verdict that says something is wrong. We can be curious and ask questions and come from that place of empathy to better understand the world around us. And when you put all of that together, it becomes a much safer place. The world becomes so much safer for us to be our authentic selves, because we're not hiding in the hole of our rigid beliefs that all must be 100% right. We are instead open and vulnerable and seeing more of the world and understanding more about how we operate and how those around us operate. And it's the unknowns that cause us the discomfort. So the more we know, the more safe we can feel. And the more safe we can feel, the more we're willing to explore and question everything that we know, which is something that we should do our entire lives. Because, stuff changes. New information, natural evolution. There are so many ways where there's nothing in the universe that is particularly rigid. And so if we're not flexible enough to move along with it, we're going to get left behind. And we're never going to be in that place where we truly feel that we are being our authentic selves. So I'm curious. Are you curious? And if you've been afraid to really be curious before, does anything we've talked about today make you feel a little more confident that maybe there's a couple starter questions you could ask yourself? Maybe there's a situation where you find yourself getting wound up or offended or anxious because of something that is perceived to be happening to you or something that someone else is doing. Could you practice a little curiosity and see how that works? I'd love to hear how that works for you. So please comment or reach out and let me know. Until next time. Hey, thanks for listening to A Brave Journey. I'm so happy we're here. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and leave a review and share this with a friend who could benefit too. See you next time.